There's a lot of very dedicated people.
I think you just hinted at one of the easiest analogies, who's at the table.
Like my dad said, log and always be worth more than you're being paid.
We're gonna have 30,000 more people here in the next 10, 12 years.
I am optimistic that we'll continue moving in the right direction.
And that takes finding people that wake up every day and they're thankful and they believe they can change the world.
This BendBeat discussion is brought to you by the Ladd Group, Ben's leading real estate team.
As background, Christopher Jones, he's a principal at Project, design and development firm, originally based out of Portland, right?
Myself?
Or Project.
Yes, Project, yep.
Yep, and they have, they're known for blending architecture, planning, and some really cool cutting edge community thinking. You incorporate livability into your designs. And for those that are listening, if you want to picture this, some of the projects we can talk about for visuals are what? Basecamp down by the Colorado Street Bridge.
Yep.
The Aretē condominiums, which we're in now, and then the Grove Food Hall in Northwest Crossing, right?
Yep. And Range Apartments right next door.
Oh, the Range Apartments, yeah, right down there on Discovery Park. So, but beyond that, we were just talking ski mountaineering in Europe. You're a passionate cyclist, skier, and athlete. And there's a lot of layers on what you bring personally and what Project brings to Bend. So I thought it would be a really fun, interesting discussion to talk about the built environment here in Bend.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about yourself and your origin story, how you ended up sitting here in Bend, Oregon.
Yeah, I mean, we could go way back, but I'll keep it brief. Like I went to school and then I graduated and I was a bike commuter to my first job out of school, working for an affordable housing developer.
And where was that?
San Diego.
In San Diego.
Yeah, so a vertically integrated affordable housing developer called Chelsea Investment Corporation.
Okay.
And at the time, I was, like most kids, really poor out of school. I just funded my way through school, started bike commuting, and met some folks out of that that kind of led me on a different trajectory into the cycling world and professional cycling career. We lived in Europe for 10 years and I raced over there, and yeah, it was just a different track to life that, now plays heavily into like our work, incorporating it, bringing this natural environment into the built environment and kind of blending everything.
Well, let's stop there for a second. You just glossed over 10 years of professional cycling, professional cycling in Europe.
Yeah.
Isn't learning to like bike commute and turn that into professional cycling like an odd route into that sport? A little late to the game?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I was 27 at the time. If you know anything about professional sports, most people they live and breathe it from the time they're a kid, right?
Yeah.
And, by the time you're 27 in any sport, usually broken or, you're just kind of mid-career at best. So I don't know. I was an alpine ski racer growing up. I did not have any endurance sporting background.
Yeah.
You could call it dumb luck. I don't know, like stars aligned.
That's amazing.
Yeah. And I just started riding for fun and started winning races, and there's apparently scouts in professional sports, and someone saw me and said, do you want to try this? I said, what is professional cycling?
Amazing.
So and then, one thing led to another, kind of jumped up the ranks. If you think of like AAA baseball, it's like minor leagues, right? And you work up to the professionals. And I think my parents didn't think it was legitimate until, maybe my third year in, I was racing in Europe and they turn on the TV and there I am. It's like, oh, this is actually something. So, it was life throws you turns and curveballs, right? And that was never on our life plan. I had a great job and probably career if I'd stayed with Chelsea. And this, just kind of took a turn and definitely informed how we look at the world, how I look at the world, how we operate, what we prioritize, gave me exposure to places I would never visit. I mean, I raced in Eastern China, the Middle East, every European country, South America, Africa, all these places that, even if you go as a tourist, you're not immersed in those places. And, we would spend weeks at a time in these places. So, it's given me a different perspective on everything. Yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, how your experience with the built environment affects lifestyle, right?
Right. And you experience it kind of in the purest form because you're not in a car.
Yeah.
You know, most of the time you're actually on a bike for 6 hours a day, right?
Yep.
Going from point A to point B, interacting with the locals, kind of, you know, observing. I mean, you're racing, so you're paying attention, but you're picking up on these little visual cues that you see out there.
Well, that's pretty rad.
Yeah.
You always kindly invite me to go ski uphill with you, and I always turn that down because I know I couldn't keep up with you. But that's pretty amazing. So, just as we're talking about that, so you've now segued your professional cycling into a professional level ski mountaineering, right?
That was
on the side.
Yeah, just on the side, just for fun. There will be a common thread that there's a lot of energy on this side of the room.
Yeah.
You know, it's just. And it's where I find my inspiration outside, like most of us here in Central Oregon. And so it's just, applying that energy in the right place. And when I retired from cycling, we wanted to move back to the States. We had one child and we wanted to expand our family. Our family all lived here. So I was actually in contract, decided I wanted to stop racing. We moved back to Bend, and something I could not do when I was racing was ski. They wouldn't let us ski. It was in the contract. If you injured yourself skiing, they were going to withhold your salary, so on. So I took that very seriously. So I had this pent up demand for 10 years, no skiing. Came back to Central Oregon. Uphilling was kind of a new thing. Yep. Got introduced to it on Tumalo of all places. Started making all the mistakes everyone took, and then COVID, this is fast forwarding a few years, but like COVID hit and we had the opportunity to go back to Girona where we lived for a school year. And I kind of got connected with folks who were into this ski mountaineering thing. The US ski team was looking for folks to do this and race World Cups in Europe, and one thing led to another. And like I was at another World Championship representing Team USA and some World Cups, and like just something I never, the first time I went cycling, I was like, wow, this is incredible, unexpected. But the second time and third time, with the ski team was kind of crazy. So that is, it's a side thing. I've kind of dialed it back a little bit this past year, just as kids get older and, travel is much more difficult. But yeah, definitely a way to expend some energy, and it's just like continue like this exploration of, the nature that's around us and enjoy it. So.
Well, that's incredible. You're being humble about a lot of those accomplishments. But let's segue this a little bit. So we're talking about these concepts in design that you saw from your early development days to your travels. But let's segue that into some of the built projects that Project has delivered here in Bend. Yeah. Whether it's the visuals of Aretē or the Grove or Basecamp or whatnot, or the range. Let's talk about, kind of the central theme of what you're trying to do that perhaps is a little bit different than some of the other developments that we've previously seen here in Bend.
Yeah.
What are the core tenets that you're trying to bring to the table?
Yes, we always, as a company, when we look at, if you look at our portfolio, every single project is different. We're not formulaic, and that sometimes can be to a fault. If you look at our work here in Bend, the first project was the Range Apartments. Yep. Just kind of a take on the classic 3-story walk up, but if you look at it through a trained eye, there's a lot of subtle moves. The lines of the building are meant to look like mountains. The actual focal point of the project is the landscape and the way the community center interacts with that. There's a big glass wall. It's kind of the first attempt in Bend at a multi-family level at any scale to have a community center where the community gathers. And now you see the newer developments have taken that to like the next level. There's hot tubs, pizza ovens, all of these things. But that was the first attempt in Bend, and that was just out of our appreciation of the outdoors, and also like a recognition that people are looking for a place to gather, no matter where they are. Yeah. So then we jumped to Basecamp, which is townhomes. Totally different type of project, urban townhomes, and in the center of it, all the townhomes ring this plaza, and it's a very simple gesture. There's barbecues, fire pit, place to sit, gather, again, kind of drawing people outside and into that space. And then out of that work, we sit on the Grove block. And the premise of Grove was it's like a modern day Grange hall, right? Like people love to gather over food and beverage. And if you look at the architecture of the front of the market hall building, it's all glass and the doors slide open. So people, there's this permeability between the interior and exterior of the building.
Yeah.
And I think people appreciate that. I was just down there and, the barista was saying like, hey, I can't wait till we can open the door later this afternoon, right?
Yeah.
And like that air transfer and our new work that is starting up or almost done here in Bend continues that trend. So we're always doing that. And then the other side of I guess one of our underlying philosophies is just it's place-based, right? Like we don't want to come in from Portland with an idea and then it just doesn't fit Bend, right?
Yeah.
Our work in Spokane looks like it belongs in Spokane. So I think that's maybe how we approach things differently here in Bend, versus other folks who are maybe, they've always been here, they come from outside of town and don't really understand it. We have that advantage because I'm here.
Yeah, what I've always appreciated is how you've incorporated kind of the full life cycle and gathering spaces outside of the built unit for that, for the bedroom, bathroom, living room of that individual unit. And, Kirk Shirley even once came to me and he goes, the one big miss that we had about Northwest Crossing is we didn't have a gathering space.
Yep.
And what's funny is I saw some of your original renderings of the Grove and it has all the, the computerized figures like interacting with the doors open in that as a plaza space. And now any day you pass that, you can snap a picture and it's that and more. Yeah. It's inside, it's outside, it's families, it's work meetings, it's, it's mom stroller clubs, it's everything. And it really has become, kind of a cultural eating, food, interaction hub here in West Bend.
Yeah. Yeah. And I live in the neighborhood and I use it as a consumer all the time, right?
Yeah.
Like, where do you guys want to go tonight? I don't know. There's a bunch of us. I don't want pizza. I don't want. Let's go to the Grove, right?
Yep.
And any time of day, you walk in there and you see people using it. And I think at that level, it's a huge success. I mean, we opened at a time when restaurants, you couldn't go into a restaurant, right? So it's not always easy.
Yeah.
But when we're thoughtful with the design and it's very place-based, over the long run, things are going to work out.
Brian Ladd here. I appreciate you listening. This BendBeat podcast is proudly produced and brought to you by the Ladd Group at Cascade Hass & Sotheby's International Realty. We at the Ladd Group believe that real estate is more than just homes. It's about our community. We're deeply committed to making Bend a better place, and we dedicate ourselves to serving our home buyers and our home sellers at the absolute highest levels of our industry. You can learn more at bendpropertiesource.com, or you can always give us a call. Enjoy the rest of the podcast.
Yeah, well, we could go into so many different avenues on that, but you've had 100% occupancy there from the beginning, and restaurants are able to survive there where it's traditionally harder for them to maintain overhead, whatnot. But it's a very exciting project, and we'll put links into it. But I guess, let's talk about some of the challenges here in Bend. A lot of your projects have to do with housing, and everyone talks about how high housing costs is, affordability, but then on the flip side, they'll complain about growth, things like that. I guess if you were to just say, what are the biggest challenges you face, headwinds and challenges you face as a developer here in Bend, what would those be?
Yeah, it's, there's opportunity, there's also challenges, right? And I think those challenges are sometimes good for us because there's barriers to entry that we understand those challenges and how to solve them, where someone from maybe outside doesn't really understand that. But Oregon land use laws they're good and they're bad, right?
Yeah.
The urban growth boundary is a thing that we all have to deal with, and it's great because it prevents sprawl.
Yep.
But also, if you don't go dense, then you have a really limited supply, and you see the city of Bend is struggling on how to fix that right now. They've taken the approach of, the Bend Central District will promote density there through various measures, and that is one way to solve it. Yeah. And this Aretē project is kind of an attempt to solve density also, right? We looked at Northwest Crossing. It's very single-family home oriented up until this project, when I'm talking for ownership, right?
Yeah.
We've done other for rental projects up here, but right now I think you would know better actually, but entry price of a single family home up here is over $1 million. It's north of $1 million, and people want to live here. So, the original premise behind this, one of the underlying premises was, well, we'll make it affordable housing for Northwest Crossing, right?
Yep.
Small units, dense, and you get a product that you can buy for $500,000 to $700,000, right?
Yep.
And it appeals to a different type of buyer sometimes, but that was like our solution.
Yeah.
To provide some affordability, and people will laugh because $500,000 is not always affordable. But in this neighborhood, it does allow someone who doesn't want to go for the $1 million plus price tag to live here. So density is one way to solve it. And not everyone is into density. Not everyone wants to live in a condo or an apartment, right?
Yep.
But if you provide those options, then it provides some relief for the single family homes.
Yeah, kind of across the board.
Yeah. And another way we've taken an approach to that is, we started, we felt out of necessity, this vertically integrated modular workforce housing program initiative.
Yep.
Where we started, we raised some money with a capital partner, and we started our own modular factory in Bellingham, Washington, and we built a pilot project that's over by St. Charles here. It's 87 units out of that factory, trucked them here, stacked them, and that comes online in about 4 weeks. And that building in a factory, with like assembly line methodology, just like you would see at any car manufacturer, actually someday will allow us to hit a lower price point where we can deliver like workforce housing units, and still make the margins our investors demand, versus like a site built. This pilot project, we're like all pilot projects and prototypes, it's just everything runs longer, it's over budget and all that. But at the end, we're still holding true to our North Star, and it is a workforce housing project. We get no assistance from the city, zero assistance from the state, anyone. We're just staying true to ourselves on that, and it will rent for what the state has determined is affordable for someone making 80 to 120% of AMI in this, in the city of Bend. So, I think a one person household, it's something like 80% is, I think, $62,000 or $64,000 a year, and the corresponding rent is something like $1,700 a month for a one bedroom.
So that's all on your own. This is not a city project. There's not outside funds coming in to help you guys.
No, and it was simply like us looking at the market, kind of nationwide, really.
Yeah.
But if we're talking about Bend, you can look at Bend, and there's incentives to build for affordable housing, 60% of AMI or below.
Yep.
And people build to that. And then there's market rate developments like Aretē, a bunch of the things that are going on. And there's just like, some people call it missing middle.
Yep.
Some people, there's other terms for it.
Yep.
And we just said, well, we can't build to that on site. How can we get there? So we went down this modular route, which turned into a whole just wormhole of things that was awesome. And we learned a ton. We could probably have like 5 episodes on that, but it allows us to build to that. And so the idea there is to scale it. I think we need time to breathe after the pilot project. Because the factory in Bellingham, we went from 0 to hero. We went from 0 employees to 95 employees in the matter of like 4 months. And we produced the 87 units, which are 72 modules, in just over a year.
Yep.
So it was like huge, and tons of learnings that we just need to like take a breath and like just absorb it before we do it again. We have a factory in Portland that we built as part of this, as a part of the Mass Timber Innovation Center. That right now is just sitting empty while we figure out what to do. But like those types of things we're gonna have to get creative to like solve the problem here, right? In Bend, I think the contractor pool is here small. We love the contractors here, but sometimes, like the more people that are here, the tighter the bids get, right? Those types of things. We hear a lot of times that just from contractors that the subcontractor pool is constrained. All of the things that make us love Central Oregon also can play as like headwinds too.
Well, it's awfully ambitious that you're trying to solve it on all ends, from creative projects that are fairly high end, like we're sitting in now, all the way to workforce housing and everything in between. without public support. I guess there's a lot of public initiatives over at City of Bend, but the amount of things that you're trying to tackle right now is pretty wild. How would you address, and for those that are in the industry like ourselves, where I've sat in on the meetings and with investors and whatnot, trying to figure out how to deliver projects like this and the risk versus reward and the thin margins therein, how would you address for someone who is not privy to that and all they see is growth and high prices for the built product, and they're saying, the greedy developers are building all this stuff, but it's not for us, and they're not addressing our needs. And you went into it with all the different product types that you're trying to deliver. But where would you start a conversation with that person that feels like they're on the outside of what's being built and what's being built in Bend today?
Yeah, that is the conversation at the moment. I mean, my friends and they're in the outdoor industry, right? Which historically doesn't pay well. And, you see people in the service industry that are living 3, 4, 5 to a house. That is the conversation. And we're very much of the attitude that the more products you can bring into the market, that more it's going to help everyone, right? Like we often hear why are people building $2, $3, $5 million homes? That's not what we need, but the more supply you have, the more it's going to pull people either up, into those. The $2 million buyer is going to get out of a house that's $1 million, and that and it's going to pull people that way, and which is going to free up the bottom. And then it's just we keep going back to the creative solutions. We've messed with the small unit format to help lower rent as well. But it will be it's not just us. We need kind of everyone in our industry and in the city, to be a part of the conversation, and they are increasingly more a part of the conversation, which is great too. Changing laws and whatever it's parking ratios or setbacks or whatever density, those types of things. We have a project that will start construction late this summer, hopefully, down south of the old mill off of Brookswood, that uses the city's small unit development code. It's a new code they came up with where you can take an RS, so a single family zoned piece of land, and you can get double density on it if you build an 800 square foot main unit and a 400 square foot ADU. So now instead of providing one house, you can provide 2 houses on the same amount of land. So that's our first foray into that. It's very much single family home, which is not what we typically do. But we see that as a creative solution, and the city came up with that on their own. It was kind of a roll out of the cottage code that they had introduced. And so I think that is, a potential solution too. Now we're, instead of, on what would historically be 11 home sites, we're going to have 21 homes, right? So those types of things, you just pulling from all of those different things, it's going to get there.
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, and we were talking to all of our people in different mountain communities, like you are, right? What are you guys doing? How is this working? And trying to solve it, because we're concerned too.
Yeah. So what I've admired about how Ben's trying to treat this is, unlike some resort markets like Jackson or whatnot, that creates a contingent of housing that is subsidized, that's limited to certain incomes to keep service in the community, but there's not the full property chain. It's that and then the rest, and then there's this massive hole in the middle, so it kind of traps people in a very limited housing type to work in the service, whether that be teaching or fire department or waiting tables or whatnot. But then there's not really the ability to kind of move up and down the pricing chain and participate in the wider spectrum of housing in a community. And I think that while it's yet to be felt to the level that everyone wants, I feel that we're making some pretty big strides on different housing types that for the long term in Bend are going to really help open up that supply, so that demand crisis that we've experienced in a couple different eras, one in the early 2000s and then secondarily especially during that pandemic peak. But I think that we're starting to find a little bit more homeostasis across Bend when we look geographically across all the quadrants, things like that. I guess all I'm saying is I'm encouraged by where we're going.
Yeah.
Would you agree?
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I think you look at the community we're sitting in right now, Northwest Crossing, and how diverse it is, whether people know it or not. There's a affordable senior housing project sitting right next to us, right? And there's an affordable housing project just down the street. They're building housing, next to Summit High School for teachers, right? But then at the same time, we have all different projects. You have a market rate multifamily project. You have single family homes. So I think that, just in a microcosm, that's a really good example of what we need. We just need more of it.
Yeah. More of everything.
We
don't want growth, right?
Yeah, no, it is kind of the paradox of everything. And you see national builders coming into town and around, Lennar and folks like that, which is, I am not a single family home builder. They might drive those guys crazy, but I look at it as that's great. Those guys can build to such a lower price point and still maintain whatever margins they need. And then, they can exit at a lower price point than we're used to being seen here. So even those kinds of things are great too.
Yeah, but I think it's the diversity in product type. And I think if we were to just, say, hey, get out of the way, remove the urban growth boundary and let single family build our way out of this, I don't think we would get there. And I think that the corresponding sprawl and issues with that would be really felt. And and it's weird. I think that it's maybe we can only judge these Oregon land use contexts in arrears.
Yeah.
But the long-term built environment of Bend is pretty exciting now. And I think where we stand, to go in the next 20, 30 years is pretty exciting.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's, what's your hope for kind of the visual and the livability of Bend? And let's say, when your kids are going to college, let's talk 2040, 2050,
Yeah, you're making me feel old now, but I think back, we moved here in 2012.
Okay.
So, it's been 13 years. Yeah. And the change in that amount of time. Then, you back up to when I came up here as a kid to go skiing, early 2000s, back then. So you see that growth, and the town is just gone crazy, right? Yep. And for all the right reasons, we all want to be here for the right reasons. So I think we're at a point now, especially density. If we're going to grow, it's going to be dense. And the land use laws just point us in that direction. We can only grow out so much. So if that's a fact, then I appreciate the moves the city is trying to make right now, as painful as they are, and we haven't seen the tail end, but the east-west connections, the Franklin, the Greenwood, all of those corridors, the city is trying to work those right now, and they're trying to improve them and improve connectivity. You see that on east-west on Reed Market, a little further south, and it's extremely painful, I think, for commuters and people traveling right now. But improving connectivity, I think, is going to be huge. Yeah. Right. For livability, just for just even practicalness, getting that. So I think those types of things, still not losing the core of who we are. Parks and Rec does an amazing job, right? Of we pay these STC fees and they come up with phenomenal projects that inspire people, and they promote connectivity with all their trails. And we have a surf wave in the middle of the river and an ice skating rink in the middle of the desert. That's who would have thought of all of those things? Yeah. So I think that continuing, right? And continuing to inspire everyone is my hope that we don't lose that part of it too, right? There is this built environment that you and I control, but we don't necessarily control that part of it, the fun built environment. Yeah. I think again, just smart growth, and it takes everyone being a part of the conversation. You guys on our side, the city, the builders, everyone to keep pointing it the right direction. There's some really good markers out there right now with OSU Cascades, right? Their master plan and the way they plan to grow with this net zero, every building's at zero. They have, energy, self-sustaining energy, on site. All of that stuff is very forward thinking. And they have the resources to do that, but I think other folks will start to if that becomes more normalized, then other folks, right, start to incorporate. Like we've always gone to like, LEED certification, Earth Advantage certification, but we've never taken the leap of like, geothermal wells or all of those things that those guys are doing, like it. So that is somehow at some point in the near future is going to be incorporated into everyone's work, hopefully. So.
Yeah. So while we can become embittered and jaded about the changes that we've seen, if you were to come to Bend with fresh eyes, do you see it as equally less or more exciting than when you first saw it?
I think it's more exciting. We tour folks all the time from around the country. It's always interesting. It's like we had some folks out last week who are potential partners, but one of them came from the Midwest and one of them was from the East Coast.
Yep.
And they've all heard about Bend and seen us ranked in the top 10 of whatever the metric is, like best ski town, all of these things, fastest growing. And they were like, this is unreal. Like, the guys, they stayed downtown. The guy in the morning got up and he ran, and then they came and then they walked over to one of our sites in the BCD, and they're like, we can see, the air is clear, we can see Mount Bachelor.
Yeah.
We just forget all of that, right? And like the day-to-day like challenges and struggles. And then, if someone comes in with fresh eyes, and we get to see that often, and you probably do too. It's like, oh wow, this is great, and like even folks from our Portland office who know Bend really well, every time they come over, they're like, this is unreal, you know? So we live such a high quality life across the spectrum here in Bend that it's easy just to forget that that's like, it becomes normalized, right? Our baseline is so high. But we want to keep it that way, right? And I think, that it's good to be reminded of how good we have it so we can continue to like preserve that and then try and enhance it if we can.
And what's so interesting about Bend, and I know that we have a million challenges, but there's one of the great things about it is that people shoulder the load, take some responsibility for the issues outside their direct responsibility. And try to contribute, whether it's through service or whether it's through business or whether it's through built, product and residential and commercial like you. There's a common set of values at the core of making Bend a better place that I can insist is not ubiquitous in similar towns.
Yeah.
And it's that through line, that core value that we've still been able to hold on to. And that's what makes me hopeful and, in love with this place and hopeful that, our children have the same opportunities and excitement about Bend.
Yeah, I agree. I think honestly, I think it comes from the outdoor. Like if you're a lover of the outdoor, there's a code, right? Like we're all there together. We're there to support each other, and it just kind of flows into our day-to-day life. That's where I get it. And I think that a lot of the people here are here for that reason. But I agree. Like not every place is like this, right? And it's special. And if I knew how we could preserve that other than, the things we've mentioned, like I just hope that it continues as well. So.
Well, I'll leave it at that. Thank you for your time today and, for being part of the conversation.
Yeah. Thank you.
Cheers.
Yeah, cheers.
This was presented and created by the Lad Group at Cascade Hassett Sotheby's International Realty. Whether you're buying, selling, or simply dreaming about your next chapter, we at the Lad Group are here to guide you. You can visit us anytime at bendpropertysource.com. Until next time, thanks for tuning in.